You think a waitress like you could ever handle my orders? The words cut through the air like shards of glass, sharp, impossible to ignore, echoing off the polished marble walls of the Sterling Room, San Francisco's most exclusive rooftop restaurant. Crystal chandeliers refracted the early evening light, scattering prisms across the long mahogany table where executives in tailored suits and glimmering watches had paused mid-bite. Forks frozen, eyes shifting uncomfortably as the billionaire's laugh rolled across the room, confident, dismissive, meant to wound. Monique Harris moved silently behind the server's station, her dark eyes scanning the scene with practiced attention, noticing the way the men's smirks curved, the subtle curls of disdain, the small gestures that signaled arrogance disguised as charm. Her apron was crisp, shoes polished, hair pulled back into a tight bun, but it was her calm posture, her steady hands, and the quiet precision of her movements that belied the storm brewing beneath her composed exterior. She had spent years mastering observation, listening, understanding, and while she was counted among the invisible staff, tonight she was more aware than anyone in the room. David Chun, the Chinese billionaire CEO, leaned back in his chair, a glass of Bordeaux in hand, blonde highlights catching the low amber glow, eyes scanning the staff as if sizing up pawns in a chess game. He didn't see Monique, didn't care to. In his world, people like her were background noise, part of the scenery. Yet every syllable he uttered, every exaggerated gesture, every attempt at dominance, was catalogued by her mind like a meticulous archivist. The clinking of fine silverware, the low hum of the jazz trio in the corner, the subtle hiss of air conditioning, all of it faded into a backdrop as she focused entirely on the cadence of his voice, the rhythm of entitlement, the predictable pattern of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The servers moved around her, pouring water, adjusting napkins, smoothing the polished surfaces, but Monique was already calculating her moment, waiting for the precise instant when observation would turn into action. And then it came, a casual but cutting remark meant for a colleague just out of earshot. Make sure she doesn't mess up the orders in front of these investors. A flicker passed across David Chen's eyes, a micro-expression, a blink too quick for most, but Monique saw it, registered it, and allowed herself the smallest curve of a smile. She didn't flinch, didn't speak. She simply moved with measured grace, adjusting the silverware and aligning the plates with a subtle, almost imperceptible flourish. Every motion was deliberate, a silent declaration that she was present, aware, and ready. The room buzzed with quiet tension, an undercurrent of anticipation that none of the executives could name, their attention drawn subtly to the poised figure, who seemed almost to blend into the background yet radiated an unseen command of space. In that moment every detail mattered. The glint of crystal, the reflection of candlelight on polished wood, the soft click of her shoes against the marble floor, the whisper of her sleeve brushing a glass as she passed, a symphony of small actions magnified by the weight of expectation. David Chun, oblivious to the calculations unfolding beside him, lifted his glass again, toasting the future of his multi-billion-dollar venture, words dripping with condescension, unaware that Monique Harris, silent, composed, and infinitely capable, had already begun to claim her presence in the room, readying the moment that would flip expectation, challenge authority, and reveal the genius that had always existed quietly beneath the surface. Monique Harris moved with precise steps behind the gleaming server's station, her eyes scanning the table and the room beyond, taking in the subtle hierarchy of gestures, the clipped tones of polite conversation that barely concealed impatience, the shifting of weight in tailored suits, the discreet checks of watches, the micro-expressions that betrayed amusement, disdain, or curiosity. Every detail was catalogued, a mental map of intention and expectation forming in real time. She adjusted a water glass, aligning it perfectly with the plate, the soft clink of crystal against porcelain resonating through the air, drawing no attention, yet marking a rhythm in her calculated movements. Her mind replayed lessons from years spent learning languages, interpreting nuances, noticing patterns, absorbing information without revealing her own presence. She had walked into rooms like this countless times, invisible, underestimated, but tonight the room held something different, a tension that she recognized as anticipation, as if the air itself knew that the predictable order of power was about to be challenged. David Chun leaned forward, gesturing broadly as he discussed the potential expansion of his enterprise, his hands slicing the air, punctuating each word with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned, never interrupted, never met a barrier he could not circumvent. His colleagues nodded, their smiles polished but controlled, reflecting admiration, fear, or complicity, yet none of them truly understood the quiet calculations taking place behind the poised figure in the corner. Monique inhaled steadily, noting the flicker of impatience that passed across his eyes when a server briefly blocked his view of the table for a moment too long, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his watch caught the ambient light and drew his gaze away. Each observation built upon the next, an invisible crescendo that mapped the room's energy, a silent preparation for the exact moment when she would step from observation into action. A glass of sparkling water wobbled slightly in a guest's hand, a napkin fluttered to the polished floor, and Monique's reflexes met each small disruption with ease, hand steady, posture unwavering, face calm. Yet internally her focus sharpened, her senses attuned to the cadence of voices, the timing of laughter, the breathless pauses between words, the space where authority and assumption converged. The musicians in the corner played softly, their chords blending with the muted chatter, but to Monique it was a backdrop, a canvas upon which the drama of perception, expectation, and latent intelligence would soon unfold. She felt the weight of the room shift subtly as she moved toward the table, every step deliberate, an almost imperceptible announcement of presence without arrogance. David Chun continued, unaware of the increasing attention drawn to the poised waitress navigating seamlessly through the scene, aligning cutlery, adjusting seating, attending with precision that silently contradicted the assumptions made about her role, about her capacity, about her intelligence. And in that quiet tension, the guest leaned forward slightly, subconsciously sensing the potential for an unexpected revelation, for the breaking of the invisible boundaries that dictated who was seen, who was acknowledged, who held power. Monique Harris, fully aware of the expectations and the patterns of oversight, prepared herself, not with overt motion, not with confrontation, but with the controlled confidence of someone whose competence and intellect would soon speak louder than words, ready to transform the atmosphere of the room, subtly shift the hierarchy, and signal the moment when the underestimated would reveal the depth of her hidden genius. David Chun shifted slightly in his chair, adjusting the cuff of his tailored gray suit, the polished leather of his shoes catching the warm glow of the chandelier as he scanned the room with the practiced confidence of a man used to commanding attention, every movement calculated to reinforce authority. Monique Harris moved with fluid precision along the perimeter of the dining area, balancing trays with crystal glasses filled with sparkling water, each step deliberate, each gesture measured, almost a choreography of service and subtle assertion. The soft hum of the live jazz trio blended with the clinking of fine silverware, creating a rhythm that seemed ordinary to most, yet Monique registered every nuance, every whisper, every sideways glance cast by the executives around the table. Her dark eyes flicked briefly to the polished mahogany surface reflecting the amber candlelight, noting the slight imbalance of a wine glass, the precise angle of a napkin fold, and adjusted each imperceptibly, movement so minute that no one would consciously notice, but that set the stage for an exacting display of competence that contradicted the assumptions surrounding her. David Chun continued to speak, outlining projections and partnership opportunities with a voice smooth and measured, each word steeped in expectation and entitlement, the cadence deliberate, intended to dominate the room and the narrative of success. Monique's awareness was total, capturing patterns in his gestures, the repeated phrases, the subtle emphasis on certain words, the way he smiled when assuming acquiescence, all catalogued meticulously as mental notes for the moment she would engage. She paused briefly at the side of the table nearest the CEO, the tray in her hands perfectly balanced, her stance quiet yet commanding, radiating an unspoken presence that pulled the gaze of those closest to her without any overt action. A subtle shift in David Chen's posture, a lean forward, a narrowed gaze, told her he noticed just slightly, yet enough to recognize that the expected dynamic of control was beginning to bend. Monique's mind traced back to years of disciplined study, languages learned in silence, observing human behavior, noting authority and deference, all converging at this precise moment where a single well-timed action could disrupt expectation, quietly challenge assumptions, and reveal the hidden depth of her capability. Every breath, every micro-expression, every imperceptible movement around her became data, a silent score of the room's emotional architecture. She adjusted the angle of a chair, smoothed a crease in the tablecloth, straightened the stem of a wine glass, each subtle act magnified. by the intense attention of those around her, creating an invisible network of influence that was entirely hers. The executives remained absorbed in the presentation of David Chan, unaware of the meticulous orchestration taking place just a few steps away. Yet the tension began to build, palpable, unspoken, as if the room sensed a shift in authority and was holding its collective breath. Monique Harris exhaled softly, steadying herself for the precise moment, feeling the rhythm of anticipation, the pressure of observation, and the electric potential of intellect about to reveal itself, knowing that when she finally spoke, the room would bend in recognition of a brilliance that had always been present but never acknowledged, a quiet mastery that would command attention without demanding it. The subtle hum of conversation in the Sterling room seemed to pause for a heartbeat as Monique Harris took a deliberate step closer to the table, her tray steady, her posture composed, yet charged with a quiet confidence that drew invisible lines of attention. The polished floors reflected the amber candlelight and the crystal chandeliers, casting a warm glow that shimmered off the glassware, illuminating every small movement with clarity, yet none of it diminished her controlled presence. Guests shifted slightly in their seats, sensing an imperceptible shift in energy, a subtle anticipation that something remarkable was about to occur. David Chan continued to outline projections with precise articulation, his gestures punctuating each point, eyes scanning the room for acknowledgement, approval or subtle nods from colleagues, entirely unaware of the imminent disruption to his assumed dominance. Monique's dark eyes flicked across the table, capturing the nuanced expressions of the investors, the micro-adjustments of their postures, the faint lean forward in curiosity, all catalogued as part of her internal mapping of influence and expectation. Her hand hovered over the tray for a moment, poised, not in hesitation, but in perfect timing with the rhythm of the room, as if awaiting the perfect alignment of opportunity and action. She had spent years mastering observation and patience, learning the language of human behavior, the cadence of power, the moments where authority could be respectfully challenged and intellect could quietly assert itself. A slight ripple of conversation passed unnoticed by most, yet Monique registered every tone, every pause, every subtle shift that indicated attention drawn toward her, a silent audience gathering without awareness. David Chan leaned back, the soft glow of the candlelight catching the sharp lines of his tailored jacket, casting shadows that seemed to mark his authority in the space, and yet within those same shadows, Monique's presence began to assert a quiet gravity that suggested a coming revelation. She adjusted a wine glass, the faint clink resonating in rhythm with her internal tempo, a small motion amplified by the intensity of focus in the room. Every careful gesture was deliberate, calculated, part of a choreography that moved unnoticed by those not attuned, yet constructing an invisible framework of competence and attention that could not be ignored for long. The soft background music, the muted rustle of linens, the gentle glow of candlelight, all coalesced into a scene of heightened anticipation, a suspended moment in which potential energy filled the room, ready to transform into action. Monique's eyes met David Chen's briefly, the subtle recognition of awareness passing silently, the almost imperceptible acknowledgement that the assumed hierarchy of observation and authority was about to be tested. The subtle tension lingered, unspoken but palpable, as Monique Harris prepared to move from observation into deliberate, decisive action. The invisible currents of intellect and presence she carried set to ripple across the table, challenging assumptions and poised to reveal the depth of her hidden genius to an audience unaware of its impending illumination. Monique Harris took a slow, deliberate breath, her gaze lifting to meet the sharp eyes of David Chan, a subtle intensity radiating from her calm demeanor, the room seemingly holding its collective breath as if recognizing the weight of the moment. She began to speak, her voice clear, measured, each syllable precise, drawing from the years she had spent mastering languages and understanding nuance, and with a confidence that commanded attention without demanding it, she answered entirely in fluent Cantonese, articulating the specialized menu items with the kind of exactitude that only someone who had studied the language and culture could achieve. The words flowed effortlessly, and even those unfamiliar with the language sensed the authority, the depth of knowledge, the intelligence that carried with it an undeniable command over the situation. David Chan froze mid-gesture, his confident smile faltering as a ripple of surprise crossed his features. The expected dominance he had relied on suddenly challenged in a subtle but undeniable way. The other executives leaned forward, eyes widening, whispering in hushed tones to one another. cameras lifted discreetly to capture the moment, and the room vibrated with an unspoken acknowledgement of the shift in power, a quiet but profound realization that the assumptions of control had been disrupted. Monique's posture remained calm, poised, her movements deliberate, yet the weight of her intellect and preparation resonated through the space, turning what had been an ordinary display of service into a demonstration of unexpected mastery and subtle authority. The soft glow of candlelight highlighted the composed lines of her face, the reflection of crystal glasses glinting against her dark eyes, and the musician's notes seemed to pause in tandem with the collective focus of the room, accentuating the tension and the revelation simultaneously. David Chen's colleagues exchanged astonished glances, their previous confidence tempered by the evident skill and depth of knowledge exhibited by someone they had dismissed merely moments before, the realization settling in that perception and assumption had been appended without any overt confrontation or escalation. Monique's mind catalogued every micro-expression, every subtle shift in posture, every fractional pause in speech, reinforcing her awareness and presence as the room absorbed the impact of her actions. The champagne glasses glimmered under the overhead light, the polished mahogany table reflected the ambient candlelight, and in this interplay of observation, intellect, and quiet authority, the room's dynamic had shifted palpably, transforming the assumed hierarchy into a tableau of unexpected recognition and subtle, earned respect. She finished the explanation smoothly, pausing just long enough to let the resonance of her words sink in, her dark eyes meeting David Chen's again, the faintest hint of a smile acknowledging the unspoken concession, a demonstration that brilliance often emerges from quiet, prepared, and underestimated spaces, leaving the audience in awe and the atmosphere charged with admiration and reflection. David Chen blinked slowly, the sharpness in his expression softening as the weight of the moment settled in, a realization dawning that the assumptions he had carried into the room were no longer absolute, that his expected command over the space had been gently but irrevocably challenged. Monique Harris remained poised, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the tray, her posture calm, yet the intelligence and preparation that had guided every micro-movement now radiated in the quiet authority of her presence. Around the table the executives shifted, their conversations dwindling to murmurs, subtle glances exchanged as the awareness of her competence permeated the room, and the previous rhythm of expectation and deference began to reconfigure itself in real time. David Chen took a measured breath, straightening slightly in his chair, and in that pause, the grandeur of the chandelier light caught the glint in his eyes, a flicker of acknowledgement that he had underestimated both observation and intellect. Monique's gaze swept once more across the room, cataloging reactions with a practiced eye, noting the slight lean forward in intrigue, the subtle narrowing of eyes in appreciation, the imperceptible nods that spoke volumes of recognition without overt display, and every detail reinforced the shift in perception and power that had occurred quietly, decisively. She had created space for intellect and presence to speak, allowing authority to be challenged not with confrontation, but with mastery, with precision, and with the calm confidence that comes from preparedness and skill. The gentle hum of the jazz trio continued, but the atmosphere was now charged with a palpable energy, a subtle vibration that suggested admiration, reflection, and respect had replaced the prior tension and dismissal. David Chen's hand moved slightly toward his glass, a soft acknowledgement, a tiny concession to her composure and intellect, while Monique maintained her stance, an almost imperceptible smile tracing her lips, letting the recognition of her capability resonate without a word, commanding attention by being herself fully and without apology. The crystal reflections caught in the glasses and polished surfaces danced around the room as the light played across attentive faces, highlighting the subtle shift in dynamic, the quiet transformation of the hierarchy that had been assumed, and the invisible threads of influence and authority, now realigned in a room that had expected nothing more than service and compliance. Every micro-expression, every subtle exchange, every gentle acknowledgement built a tableau of newfound respect and silent admiration, the air filled with the understanding that preparation, intellect, and poise could redefine presence and influence in even the most structured and rigidly controlled environment. Monique Harris, standing with the serenity of someone entirely aware of her impact and power, allowed the room to absorb the truth of the moment, that brilliance and command can manifest quietly, skillfully, and without need for overt assertion, leaving an indelible impression that would linger long after the conversation had moved on and the room returned to its ordinary rhythm. a subtle but undeniable testament to the potency of hidden genius. And the reordering of expectation. The room exhaled as a quiet acknowledgement settled over the sterling room, the ambient lighting casting a warm, golden hue across the polished mahogany and crystal surfaces, reflecting the subtle shift that had taken place, a transformation in perception as each guest registered the intelligence and composure of Monique Harris. David Chun leaned back slightly, a soft, thoughtful expression replacing the earlier confidence, his gaze meeting hers with an unspoken understanding, a recognition of the preparation, skill, and intellect that had gone unnoticed until now, and the subtle nod he offered was less an admission of defeat and more a concession to the brilliance that had quietly emerged in his midst. Around the table, colleagues whispered, small smiles forming as they observed the disruption of assumptions, the unanticipated display of mastery that challenged their expectations, and the low murmur of admiration threaded through the room in place of the earlier tension. Monique moved with the same controlled grace she had maintained throughout, adjusting the final wine glasses, smoothing the edges of folded napkins, her dark eyes scanning the subtle reactions of each individual, noting the softened posture, the brief tilts of head, the careful glances that suggested reflection and newfound respect, all indicators that the invisible architecture of power had been quietly remodeled by her presence and her intellect. The soft notes of the jazz trio seemed to harmonize with the room's atmosphere, a gentle underscore to the interplay of observation, action, and subtle authority, and every flicker of candlelight caught in the glass reflected the nuances of a dynamic that had been reshaped not by force, but by knowledge and precision. David Chen's hand brushed lightly against the polished surface of his chair as he considered the implications of the demonstration, the precision of her language, the clarity of her thought, and the confidence in her delivery, realizing that the expectations of command he had relied upon were now tempered by awareness and acknowledgement of capability that had previously been disregarded. Monique's measured movements carried an elegance that reinforced the unspoken lesson, that brilliance need not shout to be recognized, that competence and mastery can command attention quietly, effectively, and irrevocably. As she completed her careful service, stepping back slightly to allow the space to breathe, the energy in the room remained transformed, attention replaced by a subtle, pervasive respect, an understanding that intellect and preparation can redefine assumptions and reshape the environment without a single raised voice or overt display of power. The observer's expression shifted further, a mix of awe and reflection, the earlier cadence of arrogance and dismissal replaced by consideration and admiration, as Monique Harris, silent and composed, allowed the resonance of her actions to speak for her, leaving a lasting imprint on the room, a testament to the quiet power of hidden genius realized, acknowledged, and respected in a world that had underestimated it until this precise, illuminating moment. David Chen's posture softened as he finally allowed a small, genuine smile to trace across his features, a quiet acknowledgement of the depth and precision Monique Harris had displayed throughout the evening, the warmth of the chandelier reflecting in his eyes as he considered the magnitude of her intellect and composure. Monique remained composed, her hands resting lightly on the tray as she observed the subtle shifts in energy around the table, noting the quiet admiration in the eyes of the executives, the softened expressions of colleagues who had previously displayed certainty and control, and the barely perceptible nods that conveyed newfound respect without a single word being exchanged. The soft notes of the jazz trio continued to provide a melodic backdrop, blending seamlessly with the gentle murmurs of appreciation and subtle conversations, while the polished mahogany and crystal surfaces reflected the ambient glow of candlelight, casting a warm aura over the room that highlighted the transformation in perception and expectation that had occurred. Every guest seemed to lean forward slightly, attentive to the poise and clarity of Monique's demeanor, recognizing that what had begun as a routine service encounter had become a lesson in observation, preparation, and understated mastery, a reminder that true capability often emerges from quiet competence rather than overt display. David Chen's eyes met Monique's again, the brief exchange carrying an unspoken acknowledgement of her skill, her patience, and her ability to command attention and respect through intellect alone, and a subtle shift in his own behavior suggested the recognition of a dynamic he had previously overlooked. Monique's gaze swept the room, capturing the nuanced reactions of each individual, the micro-expressions that conveyed realization, surprise, and admiration, as the atmosphere subtly changed from one of expectation and deference to awareness and recognition, a transformation orchestrated entirely through observation, intelligence, and quiet authority. The interplay of light on crystal glasses, the reflections across polished surfaces, and the rhythm of the soft music underscored the nuanced dance of influence, showing that command can be established through knowledge and composure, and that presence is defined not by volume but by clarity, precision, and skill. Guests shifted in their seats, whispers fading into thoughtful silence as they absorbed the demonstration of hidden genius that had just unfolded, and the room collectively registered that the hierarchy of perception had been recalibrated, authority had been subtly challenged, and respect had been earned through deliberate, measured excellence. In that suspended moment, Monique Harris stood as the embodiment of quiet mastery, a presence that illuminated the room not through dominance but through the undeniable weight of preparation, intelligence, and self-assured calm, leaving an impression that would linger, reshaping the perception of capability, influence, and the true meaning of recognition within the Sterling Room for the remainder of the evening. The evening in the Sterling Room settled into a calm resonance, the soft amber glow of chandeliers and the glimmering reflections on crystal and polished mahogany creating an atmosphere of understated grandeur, while Monique Harris moved with deliberate elegance, finishing her rounds with the same composed precision that had defined every step of the unfolding event. Guests leaned back in their seats, murmurs quieting as they absorbed the depth of skill, intelligence, and preparation that had silently reshaped the space, their attention now fully captured by the realization that a single individual, once underestimated, had commanded recognition and respect through competence alone. David Chun adjusted in his chair, eyes softened, posture easing as he allowed himself to truly acknowledge the subtle authority Monique projected, the careful orchestration of observation, timing, and knowledge that had turned what had seemed like a routine service interaction into a demonstration of presence and intellect. Each reflection from the glassware, each flicker of candlelight on polished surfaces, mirrored the subtle shifts in perception and influence, highlighting the transformation that had occurred not with overt confrontation, but with quiet mastery. Monique's dark eyes swept across the room, registering the collective awareness settling into a newfound appreciation, noting the gentle nods, the brief smiles of recognition, the small exchanges that conveyed understanding and respect without words, all signs that the room had been irrevocably altered in its sense of hierarchy and expectation. The soft chords of the jazz trio blended with the quiet murmurs, creating a harmonious backdrop for the closing moments of the evening, as the energy in the room, once dominated by assumption and anticipation, now resonated with acknowledgement and reflection. David Chun leaned forward slightly, a subtle, respectful smile acknowledging the quiet power and intellect that Monique had exhibited, his earlier posture of certainty replaced by contemplation and an implicit appreciation for the skills he had dismissed. Monique adjusted a tray lightly, aligning the remaining glasses with gentle care, the motion elegant and precise, emblematic of the control and mastery that had defined her presence from the beginning, a reminder that influence can be asserted through preparation, clarity, and poise without a word raised or a gesture exaggerated. Observers throughout the room felt the shift, the subtle gravity of competence drawing attention, shaping perception and inspiring reflection, each person sensing the change in dynamics and the lesson implicit in the demonstration of intellect and authority. The interplay of ambient light, polished surfaces, and attentive eyes created a tableau of quiet triumph, an environment in which respect was earned and hierarchy gently recalibrated, not through force or volume, but through mastery, timing, and the understated yet undeniable assertion of hidden genius. Monique Harris stood, composed and assured, allowing the resonance of her actions to settle into the space, the impression she left enduring, a testament to the power of quiet intelligence, preparation, and grace, and a reminder that presence and capability are most compelling when revealed through skill, awareness, and unassuming confidence, leaving the Sterling Room filled with admiration, reflection, and a recognition that the underestimated can redefine authority and command respect in the most elegant and profound ways.